Oh dear. Okay, good morning. We are in Ezekiel 45 and 46. This is part B for lesson 6. So we're catching those last few days of the homework. I'm glad we split it up again because 45 and 46 had a few things in there that I kind of struggled through. But I also ended up, because we had 2 weeks to work on this, we had our vacation Bible school here at this church, which gave us an extra week. It gave me some time to just go back again and look at the millennial kingdom and all the little pieces that we're pulling. We've talked about this already basically twice. I went back to look to see how many times am I beating a dead horse, because I tend to do that. But I just know that for people who've not done eschatology classes, there's so much of this that they're still probably really lost on. But it does not hurt to lay down a few pieces of insight that are gleaned from other people who have been doing the inductive work on it. And at least it gives you somewhere to kind of plant your feet to start with. And then from there, you come to your own interpretations on how you view this. Eschatology, when you're looking at future events that have not yet happened, there is so much diversity in insights and understandings about what it might be. Because that is, in fact, what we're looking at, is things that haven't happened. So there is no definitive on every single point. But there are some things that are very clearly definitive, right? I mean, the size, the measurements, all these things. Well, we thought the measurements, maybe not the measurements. Some of those are even questioned. I found out this last couple of weeks, looking at some things, is that word cubic that was in the measurements here in chapter 45, is that, did anybody notice how it's put in your text? How is the word cubic? It's italicized. So what does that mean for an inductive student to go ding, ding, ding? Means they added that word in. So I've heard several pastors, and as many one way or the other, say, is it really a cubit, or is that supposed to be a reed? Because way back in an earlier passage, 42:16. Let's flip back to 42:16 real quick.
We did have that first one in 45:2 that is not italicized.
Yes, and that's specifically about the measurement of a piece of furniture, not the temple, right? Is that correct? 45.
Open space round about it.
Round about it, yeah. Within the inner part of it, right. But all the others have to do with the measurements of the walls and how much land space and so forth. So where was I taking it? So 42:16, let me just show it to you so you're aware of it. He measured on the east side with the measuring reed, 500 reeds by the measuring reed. Well, a reed is about 12 feet, but a cubic is only 18 inches. Well, that is like massively different. A reed and a cubic, those are not the same thing at all. So just be aware of that at one place it's talking about the measuring of the gates and the walls, and it uses the word reed. Then over in 45 he switches, and with italics they have added this in. Somebody in this translation, basically you're getting commentary is what I'm telling you. The commentary is cubits in here. Now, here's for me how I draw myself to a place where I'm just fine with it. And that is, we're looking at a literal temple with actual measurements, which is really the most important part for you and I to come to say, we're in agreement with God. This is literal. This is going to be a literal place here on the earth. How many inches or how many feet it is not quite as important to us spiritually in our growth with God as it is to know it's a literal place. That to me puts to bed allegorical interpretation of these prophecies. You can't go allegorical on something that is so literal, which by the way is then supplemented with new feasts and activities that they're going to do that are very similar to what they were already doing in a literal temple, and all it's been done is basically revised. Something hit me on one of the videos I was listening to this morning again, which was someone had said, he talks about in that day I'm going to make a new covenant with Israel. Well, we know the new covenant specifically is speaking of Jesus, right? That the Jews will come out of the law and come into the new covenant through faith in Jesus Christ. But what we're also seeing here is an institution of new statutes and governing laws for the people in the land. A lot of it is kind of going back, it's hearkening back to what God initially wanted Israel to do in the way that they would deal with one another, how they would treat one another, and also how they would approach God in holiness. And they had stopped doing all that, which is what got them in Ezekiel cast off the land. But what we're looking at here is literal temple, literal practices. The practices have been updated for this new era, this new dispensation in time and history, right? Which he doesn't fully explain to us what the symbolisms are yet. But one of the things that we did in our homework this week is we went back on day 5. She took us back to Leviticus. Then she brought us forward into 2 places, Hebrews and Galatians. What were some truths that you pulled out of looking at these 2 things? Or were you able to say, what is she doing here? I mean, what did you understand what her method was? In essence, what does Galatians 3:24 tell us, which is what one of the passages you looked at in Galatians 3. What does 3:24 tell us the temple and all those practices that God gave to Israel? What was the point to the temple and those practices that they did, those sacrifices and the bread and how they entered and when they could enter and who could enter? What was all that supposed to do for them? Anybody have Galatians 3:24 open? Galatians 3:24. Okay, is that the one that? Are you sure you're in Galatians or is that Hebrews? Doesn't Galatians 3 say that it's a tutor to lead them to Christ?
Therefore the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ.
Okay, there we go.
Guardian tutor.
Oh, that's why you got a different translation. I don't know what you're using there. What is that translation?
Whatever came up on my computer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Type in your translation. It'll keep you in your New American Standard. When you type up your weird, it gave you something different. Or maybe it's a revised. I know they got a new revised New American Standard too now, so it could be that they just gave.
New American Standard 1995.
That's the one we are using here in our homework. Okay, but in any event, that's fine. Okay, you're right, guardian or tutor. And I just didn't hear the word tutor, and so I was like, what is she reading? That's my fault, Carol, not yours. Okay, so what we see is Galatians 3:24 brought us, after you looked at all those Leviticus passages that said, this is this offering, this is this. That was crazy, by the way. How much time did you spend in there? I got exhausted by looking at it, but I did come up with some really interesting insights by looking at it again, and I hadn't looked at those in a long, long time. But we'll talk about them when we get there. But the main thing that I'm trying to say to you about this temple and this new sacrifices and what we're looking at here, they're literal, but they're also revised to a degree because we're going to be in a new dispensation. And yet they still are going to perform the same purpose that the old covenant and the old temple services performed, in that both of them are a tutor to lead people to Christ. The old one led them to a Christ who was coming. In the temple in the millennial, it'll be used as a tool, as a tutor to bring the new people who will be born upon the earth during the millennial reign into faith. Does that make sense? So really the purpose of that symbolics that's going to be going on up there, it remains the same. God is going to be the same. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. We see that regularly throughout everything. The continuity, the orderliness of God, the purposes of God. And even though we move along in history through the gospel, well, through the whole Bible actually, we see slight changes, but always the end goal is still the same. It's all about Jesus and about redemption. It's about us coming into faith in God. And there's only one way to God, and that's through the Son. So, go ahead.
One of the things that came up for me too is the fact that just the showing your faithfulness to God to do this. And
Yes.
It kept talking about every day.
Yeah.
Every day you do this.
Right.
It's like, so how faithful are you going to be to me?
Right, exactly. And the faithful and the ones that are the perpetual, that are to be done every day, the daily sacrifice, that's done by the priest, but it's there for us to see, so that what we're doing, again, it's a tutor to remind us every day that that fire never goes out. That's a perpetual, continual offering that's offered up to God to remind us, number one, about our sin, but number two, about the one who came to provide for that sin, who was the whole burnt offering, who is Jesus Christ, who is the blood sacrifice, who is Jesus Christ. But also just to help us to say, God has said to do it in this way, and you must approach God in the way that God says. Again, a tutor, right? Okay, so that's exactly right. Okay, tell me that. What do you think?
Because people are still not going to see him. Because their eyes are going to be blinded. I mean, they're not going to believe who he is.
Where are people going to be living during that time? Is everyone going to be living right there at the temple, and we're all like the Jews, and we're all living in Jerusalem, in Judah? Yeah, we're all over the world. And what's going to be happening with people on earth during that time? Getting married. They're going to be given in marriage. They're going to having babies. Some of those babies are going to come to faith, and some of them are not, just like today. That's not going to change. What is going to be slightly different, we're going to be the shiny ones, I think some people call us, amongst them. We, the ones who come in our glorified bodies, we are the helpmate of Christ. We'll be the ones ruling and reigning under the authority of Christ, but with the authority of Christ, right? To help maintain righteous living in the land, which is what had stopped happening during all those generations progressively leading up to where we were in Ezekiel, where God cast them off the land, and where we still are today, living in rebellion. Look around the world. How many people are saved? Not very many. That's why they need it, because they're still winning souls. Okay, so with that started, what I want to do, what I haven't done before with you, we've talked about it in general, what is that millennial kingdom going to be like? I want to make a list on some of these things, just as some points of reference for you to think on it. You might want to just find either an extra sheet of paper or just write it on the back side of, like Ezekiel 45 has a whole page that's empty for you on the back side of that observation worksheet. You might want to make this list back there with, just use your pencil so you can erase and rewrite. And I'm going to make this superficial. I'm not going to need details. I'm not going to spend a lot of time teaching it. I'm just going to put these points up here. What I want them to be for you is a catalyst for you to meditate on these. We want to take Ezekiel and make it practical for us in our personal daily. Thank you. My drink is getting in the way. Yeah.
You're good, right here.
Okay. Okay. What I want it to do is be very practical, and I want there to be application for us. This isn't us looking at something that's like, this has nothing to do with me and I don't care. And there's a lot of people with that attitude. And I'm here to say to you, if God wrote it, he wrote it for our instruction, that we may know what the plans of God are and to get on board with him about the things that are coming ahead. We are preparing right now for our millennial kingdom ruling, right? I know, it's kind of scary, huh? I'm barely making it through this kingdom, Lord. And it's a really bad kingdom, I got to say. But fortunately, we have the kingdom of God living within us, so we already have the power of the Holy Spirit within us. But we have to be committed to learning every word that comes from the mouth of God, that none of those words will leave the mouth of God and remain void and unfulfilled or without fruit. We want them to bear fruit in us. So that's what I'm going to do with you real quick. So let's start out with here. The millennial kingdom. I want to ask this question. Why spring and fall feasts? God gave those to us in that first covenant, or us, I should say Israel. He gave it to Israel, right? So technically, because we do know, What did the spring feast fulfill? What did they do for us? Now that they are fulfilled, who fulfilled them? Jesus. And what did it accomplish for us? Salvation. I know, it's really, I'm telling you, I'm really going way up here. I'm not going into the details. I don't want to know about every feast and what everything represents. I just want you to understand that the spring feast, these fulfill personal salvation. Okay, that's the whole point to those spring feasts. They fulfill personal salvation, which is why during for instance, the tribulation, after the church has been raptured, during the tribulation, those who are going to go into the millennial kingdom must come here first. They have to have personal salvation first, okay? So, personal salvation through the seed, which is Genesis 3:15, the promise of the seed. You go to Galatians 3:16 and it tells you that seed is Christ. Okay? So what were the spring and fall feasts? I have them on my chart for you when you get it, but I'm just going to rattle them off. You have Passover, you have unleavened bread, you have first fruits, and you have Pentecost. Now I give that to you right now because when we get to the end of 46, we're going to talk about the new feast that God's instituting, what gets omitted, what is retained, and try to maybe discuss why. Why might that be? Okay, so that's the spring feast. What about the fall feast? Yeah. Fall feast is for to fulfill Israel's national salvation. Okay, not just anyone's national salvation, Israel's national salvation. That's why I believe that the tribulation specifically is for Israel. That's where you go back to Daniel 9:24-27. 70 weeks have been decreed, Daniel, for your people and your holy city. We have 69 of them completed. We're waiting for one more week. That's the 7-year tribulation time that's to come. And so those fall feasts then, they fulfill three things. Trumpets, Feast of Atonement, and Tabernacle. Right? Everybody with me on that? Okay. Now, what I want to say about these spring feasts, though, just as a caveat, all people come to salvation through Jesus first. Even Israel as a nation, they don't come into that salvation. They don't get national salvation for their personal salvation. They're totally two different things. Personal salvation comes through the spring feast. National salvation comes to the nation. Why is that? Why did God designate a whole 3 feasts to talk just about Israel getting her national salvation? What have we learned in Ezekiel this nation had done? What did they do to God? They did. They turned their back on him. And in the consequence of it, they did what? What did they do to him, his name? They profaned God's holy name. So all through Ezekiel, we keep seeing that I will vindicate my holy name. I'm not doing this for you, Israel, because you guys have messed up big time. I am doing this for my holy name. And so what we see here is we have the spring feast, that takes care of personal, but the fall feast, they have to have entered here before they get to come into here and come on the land during that 1,000-year reign. So, but you have to know that all people, I'm going to put all because I'm saying the Israelites as well, come to salvation through Jesus. Okay? Any Jew or Gentile who comes into the millennial kingdom alive, they will have come to Christ by faith. That's the entire planet, Jew and Gentile. If they haven't come into faith in Jesus, what happens? They're dead. Jesus talks about separating the sheep from the goat during the beginning of that millennial, right? They come before him, and what happens to the goats? What happens to those on his left? They're cast into eternal darkness. They get sent into Sheol until the end of the age of 1,000 years, then they will be brought up then to go before God's great white judgment throne and cast into hell. They are judged at the beginning of the millennial through Jesus gathering the people to separate the sheep from the goats. Okay, so now we've got a pretty clear picture on that. Yes, everyone with me? Okay, now let's talk about the next question. Why the tribulation? These are not necessarily questions that, if you haven't done a lot of eschatology, you would maybe even be at this point with us. But for those of us who've done this, I want to do this for the benefit of the ones who've been faithful with me all these years. We need to try to glean it all and pull it together into a nice, neat, compiled list for ourselves, just so we have it in our heads, and also so we can better convey it to others. If we get it straightened out in our own heads first, then when we get questions asked, we don't get confused about it. Okay, so why the tribulation? Well, again, I told you about Daniel 9, right? It's a God-decreed time for Israel. That is specifically what that time is for. So that's Daniel 9, 24 to 27. That is probably one of the most important verses for Christians to have at the tip of their tongue all the time. Memorize that particular passage is where this decreed time is given to us. And in the end of it, why the tribulation? What's the outcome of the tribulation? Yeah, to save Israel as a nation. Not the individual, but the nation, right? Yet he's going to do that. He'll save all Israel. I think Romans 11 talks about it, and all Israel shall be saved. Why? Because the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. So God has made a covenant with Israel. I'm going to save Israel, and I'm going to do it to my glory. And so I'm going to do it in spite of you. And we can certainly see that's what he's doing. In spite of Israel and their unfaithfulness, he is going to bring about what he promised to Israel by covenant. So he's, let me just give you a couple of verses. Jeremiah 30, verse 7, and then you go back to also in Ezekiel, which you'll be real familiar with now, 36, 29 to 33 is a whole section in there about saving all Israel. And he's also going to use the tribulation to deal with Israel's rebellion, right? To refine, to test, and to purge them. That's in Zechariah 13, 8 and 9. How many come through at the end? 1/3. The other 2/3, what happens to them? They die, and they're cast into hell, basically, right, to Sheol. Also, the other thing that this time of tribulation will bring about is all Jesus' enemies being made a footstool for his feet. Now, that process continues all the way through the millennium. He begins it in the tribulation, subverting, letting his power be known by the whole world globally. They all are going to say, and he is the Lord. That's what we see Ezekiel teaching us. And then they will know that I am the Lord. So he's going to do this tribulation time so that they see that at the get-go of all things. But then he's going to continue that work with Jesus by placing him upon the throne and making him the Lord of Lords and the King over all the earth. And part of the process, the beginning of that is him dealing with the Antichrist, the false prophet, and Satan, right there at the very close of the tribulation, right? Why the tribulation? Well, he deals with the Antichrist, the false prophet, and Satan, who is the one behind them, giving them power and authority to work, and them being willing to do that. All right, so that's why the tribulation. That's a couple points. I mean, there's a lot more, obviously, but I'm just giving you some big pieces here. What about why the millennial kingdom? Okay, so give me some thoughts on that.
So nobody can say the devil moved to it.
Yeah, he does that up here. Yeah, he puts Satan bound for the 1,000 years, so that during the millennial reign, what's going to happen at the end of the millennial reign?
Everybody's going to say the devil made me do it.
Yeah, everybody's going to say it. No, everybody. But how many sinners come up against Christ and His holy city at the end of the million?
Stars in the sky.
Isn't that amazing? Revelation 20 tells us again. So there comes up that repeat of a Gog-Magog war. It'll be the second one. The first one will have happened, I believe, mid-trib, but whenever you want to put it on the timeline is fine. But there'll have been a Ezekiel 36 and 37 war that will have occurred, and they call it Gog and Magog. It's Gog of Magog that does that. But then there's going to be another one. It's called the same thing, Gog of Magog, at the end in Revelation 20. So at the end of that millennial reign, there's going to be that war, and the reason is there's going to be as many as the sand on the seashore come up against God and His holy city at the end of the 1,000-year reign. Even though Satan has been bound for the 1,000 years. What does that tell you about humanity? We have an evil nature, and the devil doesn't really make us do it all. So you cannot blame the devil for everything. If that's what you're doing, you are sadly misevaluating your own personal responsibility in sin. And I do really think that's an important factor in this. I think that's actually highly stressed because of what we're seeing. It's kind of like where we have this confusion about why are we looking at sacrifices and things that are going on in the millennial kingdom if we're already saved. Well, the whole world isn't saved, number one. Number two, it's in a new dispensation where Satan is bound. You can't now blame the devil. You're now fully responsible for every action that you take. It's all on you. And God is only, what He's doing is really showing humanity, Satan there or not there, wouldn't matter. You'd still do what you did. By the way, what made Satan do what he did? His own pride. Well, so what makes us do what we do? Our own pride. Now, Satan loves to trip us up and he loves to come and tempt us, but he can't make us do anything. Okay? Interesting, right? So why the millennial kingdom then? Well, I think it's to exalt Israel for God's glory and to fulfill His promises to them, right? To exalt God's glory. What is it? What did he say? Vindicate, glory, and vindicate His holy name. Thank you. It was dancing in the back of my head, and I'm like, okay, I can't find it. Okay. He's going to fulfill all His covenants. Specifically, at that point, it's going to be to Israel. So what is He doing in that time? What are the 3 covenants God is going to be fulfilling in that millennial kingdom? Abrahamic. We do have part of the Abrahamic covenant fulfilled in Jesus, right, in the spring feast, but there are other things that are not yet fulfilled that will be in the millennial kingdom. So Abrahamic. Okay, what's the other one? Davidic. What does that one do? Yep, puts Jesus on the throne. And here's the last one. This one I only picked up when I did Ezekiel this time. I didn't pick up on it before this. What's the other covenant He's promised? What did we look at in the last 2 chapters about how the temple's going to be organized and run and who's going to have permission to do certain things and who does those burnt offerings, who gets to enter into the holy place, who gets the Levitical priesthood. So did He have a Davidic covenant? Yes, He did with Aaron, right? So He's going to fulfill here the Levitical, or you could call it Aaron covenant, right? Levitical covenant. Okay, so that's 3. Now, there may be others that I've missed at this point. If you can think of any, it would be really good for me to add those into my list. But the Levitical covenant that there would be a priest before me forever.
So is Zadok from Aaron?
Yes, Zadok is part of the priesthood. Yes, it is.
But from Aaron.
Yes, yes, and from Aaron came the Zadoks, and so this Levitical, and there's also the Conans. There's all those other family groups that come out of that, but they're all Levites. They're all from the tribe of Levi, which is Aaron's tribe, and that tribe was pulled apart by God because of Aaron's faithfulness and his service to God. God said, "I'm going to bless your tribe of people. You are going to serve before me at the altar forever," which is really, really cool. Okay, and I've got some verses in there for you. Psalm 60 and Psalm 47, and another one in Ezekiel 17, by the way, so you can go back to Ezekiel. To vindicate God's holy name, I've got that up there. That's in Ezekiel 20. There's also more. Ezekiel 36 covers all that. He's going to, and that millennial kingdom then, by fulfilling the Davidic covenant, he's going to make Jesus king. Over all the earth. Not just over Israel, but all the earth. You see that in Ezekiel 37. And then ultimately, in conclusion, he's going to put all the enemies of Jesus under their feet. Somebody open up your Bible for me. Look at 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 24 and 25.
And the final stage of completion comes when he will bring to an end every other rulership, authority, and power, and he will hand over his kingdom to the Father God. Until then, he is destined to reign as king until all hostility has been subdued and placed under his feet.
Isn't that amazing? There it is. Okay, and so the reason I kind of wanted to, just put it together in a thing that makes, I guess, gives you a little bit more insight on that is because of things like that. That one, who would know to go to 1 Corinthians 15 if you're not, well, I don't, you'd have to, that Corinthians would have to be something that's really on your mind when you're thinking about this time frame. Go ahead. You have a question?
I don't think I remember that he hands over his kingdom
To Father, yes. Isn't that amazing? I love that. It's just, and again, that just shows I and the Father are one. We have the same agenda. I am God. The Father and I are one, and the fact that Jesus had also had a relegated role to play in the triune purposes of God, and he had no problem submitting to the Father in it because he is the Father in a way. He is the Son, but he has his own designed role in the triune headship of God. Okay, the other one is another question is who will initially occupy the kingdom? And I put that word in there on purpose. Who will initially? Occupy the kingdom. It helps us kind of get a bigger idea of what's going on when we get there, isn't it? So tell me who. This one's kind of fun. Tell me who all of the people groups that are going to be in the millennial kingdom at the beginning.
Jewish mortals saved.
Okay, so men of flesh. And it's going to be Jew and Gentiles, right? Jews and Gentiles. There'll be some Gentiles who also come in the flesh, but they're believers at this point, correct? Just like the Jews. But they're in their flesh, which also helps us to understand better why these feasts that we're looking at, why the temple practices, why? Because they're still in their flesh. How are you and I in our flesh? We love the Lord, but what do we still do? We still sin. So there's still going to be that requirement there to approach God through some kind of process that gives us a clear understanding. To approach a holy God, you must come by faith. We have believing Jews and Gentiles. Anyone that's still living at the end of that tribulation, they will come in. What about others? The saints, the resurrected saints, and the new saints, right. So there's going to be tribulation saints who are resurrected if they die during the tribulation. there's going to be the church that has been resurrected, who's the bride of Christ. There's also going to be the resurrected Old Testament saints as well, right? So we have anyone who gets resurrected will come into that new kingdom. So let's put that on here. Resurrected. Church. Old Testament saints. And tribulation saints. That's really helpful to kind of get that in your head. Remember that verse in Daniel 7:12 that said, when he takes care of Satan and he casts him in for the 1,000 years into the abyss, and he handles the false prophet and the Antichrist and puts them into Sheol until the end of or into hell. Actually, he opens up hell for them. But then he goes on and he looks at the rest of those nations, and when he separates the sheep from the goats, amongst those nations, there's going to be some believers, right? The odds are there's going to be a few. And that's why he says in Daniel 7:12, but an extension of life is granted to some. It's talking about the beasts by title in that verse. It calls them the beasts. But it's going to give an extension of life granted to some kingdoms, but their dominion is taken away. Why is that? Who has dominion? Jesus. The King of Kings, right? But here's the sad thing is, as time passes, this is where we start with all believers, in other words. So we can write that on here, all believers, at the beginning. But what's going to happen? In time, rebels were going to show up. And so that's where you go to that, what we talked about a minute ago about Revelation 20, and you can read 7 to 10 and kind of get the bigger picture on all of that. Now I'm going to throw out one more thing, and I'm not going to write it up there, but just a few other insights, things that we haven't really addressed much. Christ's coming is going to be followed by the setting up of his reign over all the earth. That's a given, right? Which will include his children ruling and reigning, that's us, and the other saints, like even Daniel is told, Daniel, go your way until you are resurrected for your allotted portion, whatever that means, right? Allotted. We all apparently have an allotted portion. We don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. But we will be ruling and reigning by his authority. And I've got like 4 verses in here. Someone look at Matthew 19:28. That one was really good. I especially like that one because it's a New Testament one, and I've got a Zechariah, a Revelation, and an Isaiah in here also. But look at Matthew 19:28. Yeah.
Jesus said to them, truly I say to you, that you who have followed me, in the regeneration when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
Very interesting point there. Now, you who? Specifically, who is he speaking about? And what are they going to sit upon? And who are they judging? The tribes. So he's speaking to the Jews, right? So do you think maybe if they're going to be judging the 12 tribes, do you suppose they're the princes that we're looking at in these passages? Are they a prince that's put in a position of authority? They are going to sit on their throne and they are going to administer over it. Have you noticed how often the prince has been coming up in here, and that he's given certain privileges, but he's also giving responsibilities, right? Certain responsibilities in what he has to do for the people. Okay, so I thought that Matthew 19:28 was really good. We also know there are going to be massive changes to the topography of the earth, right? We've kind of talked about that a little bit. Ezekiel 40 to 47 really does show us that. Just by the land mass requirement to put the temple up alone, that Temple Mount has to be much larger than it is right now. Joel 3:18 has another passage in there you can go look at. What about a partial reversal of the curse from Genesis 3? The renewal. I think it's this first one. Someone look at Romans 8:21. It's a very familiar verse when you read it and you hear it, but think of it in perspective to this being the millennial kingdom.
to experience with us the wonderful freedom coming to God's children.
Okay, so the creation longs for that day when the earth is going to be regenerated, and that's during the time when Jesus comes and he will be king over all the earth. So the earth is going to be revived and brought back. Basically what a lot of people say, it's like kind of like the original Garden of Eden kind of setting. It's not no death, but it's little death, and there's going to be health and vibrancy. Even the water that we're going to see in the next chapter we're going to do, the water that flows out of the temple and goes down to the Dead Sea. What happens to the Dead Sea? It comes to life, and it will actually have fish in it. It will be a fisherman's paradise. That just blows me away. If you've ever been to the Dead Sea, you know why I'm blown away. Also, a huge changes in the nature of animals and how they work with one another. Give me the verse. You all know it. What happens? There you go. The lion shall lay down with the lamb, and the child will sit at the den of vipers or the asp, and they will not be harmed. They will do no harm in all my land. Okay, so those are a few more things talking about just what's the millennial going to be about. Now, one last point on this, and then we're going to get into actually your homework. And that is, don't confuse the millennial kingdom with the new heaven and the new earth that's seen in Revelation 21 and 22, or 20 and 21. No, 21 and 22. I think I wrote it wrong on here. 21 and 22. Okay, God and Jesus at that time will tabernacle among men. In other words, we will literally see God face to face. We're not going to do that in the millennial kingdom. We will see Jesus, who is God, but we will see Jesus, but we still won't have full access to him. He will dwell in his temple. There will be protocol for approaching him because we're still living in a world with unbelievers and sin and the tainting of sin upon people that are living at that time. So there's going to be him ruling and reigning there, but it's not like he's going to be walking around the earth saying, "Hey buddy, how you doing?" Right? But when we get to the new heaven and the new earth, we will dwell with him and he will walk amongst us. Big difference from the millennial kingdom to the new heaven and the new earth. I want to go straight to the new heaven and the new earth. Let's just do that. I mean, I'm ready for that one. And at that time with the new heaven and earth, which you always hear at funerals, what will God be doing? What will God do for us emotionally? And no crying, no weeping, no mourning. Oh, thank you, Jesus. That'll all be gone. No pain. I'm all for that one. No pain. What else won't be in the new heaven and the new earth that we will still have on this earth during the millennial? Well, there's going to be death on this or no death there. Yes, no death.
What's going on there?
Right, exactly. No death in the new millennial kingdom or the new heaven and the new earth. What about illuminations? No sun and no moon and no stars, right? Lamb and God, the Lamb and God illuminated. That's different than what's going to happen for us. Only believers will be in the new heaven and the new earth. That's when there's no more sinners, not one. It's a done deal, and evangelism is finished. Who's there is there. If that doesn't motivate you to get busy, I don't know what will. The throne of God and the Lamb are there. Both the throne of God and the throne of the Lamb will be there. But we only have the throne of Jesus in the millennial kingdom. But in the new heaven and the new earth, both the throne of God and the throne of his Lamb are there. And he says in 22:4, we will see his face. So it kind of makes me wonder in the millennial, I know that people enter into his presence. So there's going to be that priesthood that gets to, I know the prince gets to come to the outer porch, it says, of the eastern inner gate, where he sits before the Lord. He can see the glory of God, but I don't know that he sees his face because he's still mortal, right? He's not us in our glorified state, where we have been in the presence Jesus, if we believe in a pre-trib rapture, you will have spent at least 7 years while God is doing the things that he's going to do on the earth during that tribulation. We will be in heaven for our marriage and for the Bema seat judgments, where we get our rewards and we'll get our assignments for what we're going to be doing on this earth, which is really interesting. But in the new heaven and the new earth, we will see Jesus and we will see God face to face. I don't know how we're not all just laying on the ground all the time, but, worship. But it says we will see him face to face. And there is no night, and the gates are never closed. What are we seeing about gates at the temple? They're closed 6 days out of the week, open one day. So we're still seeing gates open and closed. But in the new heaven and the new earth, the gates are never closed. Well, I don't know, but he symbolics, I'm sure. And remember, the gates represent different things. It has to do with the tribes. Now, the new heaven and the new earth, go back in and read Revelation 21 and 22. And all the doors and the foundations are built upon the apostles, and the gates have to do with the names of the 12 tribes. It's all symbolics. And it's going to, I think, again, a remembrance. It's huge. It's huge with God. Okay, so I got 1 hour to get through this. I don't think it'll be too bad. I think we can do it. Okay, so let's hurry along here. The theme, 45. What did you see going on in Ezekiel 45? What is your key repeated word in the first 8 verses at least?
Holy.
There's a holy place that's mentioned, okay? And the reason it's mentioned is because it's affixed to what? To one specific location, correct? Whose location is it? That's considered the holy place, the holy. Okay. Read verse 1. Somebody read verse 1.
And when you divide by lot the land for inheritance, you shall offer an allotment to the Lord, a holy portion of the land. The length shall be the length of 25,000 cubits, and the width shall be 20,000. It shall be holy within all its boundary round about.
Okay. So what are we talking about in the first 8 verses at least? A portion of what? Land. Thank you. Land and allotment and portion is your key repeated word. Yeah, one of the paragraphs is about a portion for the Lord, but then it moves on from there, doesn't it? Okay, so just so you know that. So what we see then is land allotments are going on there. So part of your title for 45 then has to do with land allotments, right? What happens when you get to verses 9 to 25? What's the subject matter that switches? It goes from land allotments to what? Now I did this in a real big chunk. I'm going to break it down, but one of it has to do with offerings. Why and what, and also what about in verse 9, for instance? What does he tell the prince there? No violence, no destruction. What shall you do? Justice and righteousness. And then he moves into 13 to 17, and what does he tell them, that same prince, to do? Yeah, do it correctly and make atonement before the Lord for all the people, right? So again, it's a righteous situation. This is what you're going to do in order to practice righteousness before me, prince, whoever you are, the one that's ruling, apparently, I would say in this case, is in Judah. The prince over Judah is going to be allowed to eat. We've already determined that in the previous chapter. He gets to sit before the Lord to eat in the east gate on the inner court, just in the portico. He doesn't get to go into the inner gate, into the inner court area, but he gets to sit in the porch of it, and he'll see the glory of God coming out of that Holy of Holies sanctuary. He sits before the Lord and he eats before the Lord. Privilege. But with privilege comes what? Responsibility. And in this case, what we see then is this prince is the one who's going to be required to make these atonement offerings on behalf of The people, which is interesting because it's kind of like the priests do stuff on behalf of the people, but the prince is going to be the one to present them to the priest on behalf of the people. That's going to be his job. So we'll talk about that in a second. So again, it's about him doing what's right, correct? And then you see that in 18 to 25 makes another switch, and there it's talking about what? Yeah, there's going to be these appointed feasts. Did you catch that word? The appointed feasts. And the first one is the atonement for the house of Israel. On the first month, you do blah, 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 blah. And then at the close of it in 25, you give one verse to the fall feast, and that's in the 7th month, okay? So interesting to me is that when you're looking at this whole last section, if you wanted to make it a big title, it's about righteous living, right? Righteousness statutes. Every one of those talks about do righteously here, and do righteously here. So it's all about righteousness statutes. So if you want to title, and also it talks about feasts, okay? Instituting these feasts, what does the instituting of a feast do for them when he tells them on the first month do this, on the 7th month do that? What does that do for them pragmatically as people who are going to live during the millennium? What does he just reset? Rules for what? But for what? First month, 7th month. You're going to pull out your calendar and you're going to say, oh, I have a new what? Calendar. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but it's setting up a new calendar system for the people, okay? If you didn't catch that, that's really cool. Okay, so let's title this. I'll do it with this color. The theme. Okay, the first one we said was land allotments. Now, I know that titles, when you're into this kind of subject matter, they don't flow like they do when you're going into a New Testament. You're looking for your one major theme. How does it relate to your book theme? And you give it a really nice, concise, beautiful title. Here, it's because what he's doing here is it's almost like a historical, it is history. It's just future history. And he's saying, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. That's what you're titling. You're titling by events. And in this case, he's broken it down to us basically in 3 ways. So he's saying land allotments, this is what you're going to do for them. This is what I'm requiring. Righteousness. Practices and feasts, prescribed feasts for Israel. And by the way, the whole earth is going to join in with him, but Israel is the one responsible to make sure these things are set up. Okay, now, so let me get the first paragraph then. What did you title? What is your first paragraph in 45? Mm-hmm. Okay, there's the whole, yes. And actually that is a subtitle though. First it's land allotments for everything, right? If you go 1 through 8, it's all about land allotments. So let's just do that first. That's our first piece in here, and that's 1 through 8. Now let's talk about the first land allotment we see in verses 1 through 5. And what is it? It's an allotment for who? Now we can go in and talk about those in a little bit more detail if you want to. Do you have any specific points or points of interest that you learned then in verses 1 through 5 about the land allotment to the Lord? No. Okay, that's fine. It really is. It's really just cubics, measurements, whatever. But one thing that you don't really notice until you pull out and look at it all on a map, where is the land of God, the Lord's allotment at in proportion to everything else? It's smack dab in the middle of, it's the heart.
And you know
It's
what?
the
I was
heart.
pulling up all these maps for these allotments, and
They're
some
all
of them
different.
were wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of them had it up at the top.
Oh, did they? Wow. That's off by a bigly. Yeah, in a big way. Because that is not, yeah, I don't know how they got that, especially when you get into how it's, we're going to get into more detail on it, I think, in 47. Up this way and then down this way. It'll tell you where things are. Okay, so an allotment of land to the Lord, 1 to 5. Then 6, what do we have? It's land for who? Yep, land area for the city. And when you did your map on that, where is that positionally? Yeah, let me see if I can pull up this map and show you what I have here. This one was my favorite out of all the ones I looked at. The way this one shows you, see how you can see the dark green square, that's the holy allotment in the heart of it, where the temple itself is, and then this green area all around it is the land allotment for the Lord. That's holy unto the Lord. So all of this green area on here. Do you see it? Okay. Then down here is the city, which is at the east gate, which makes sense. They come through the city to enter into the area where the court will be for the holy allotment area. But this is the property of the city here all across the area, but the center part of the city is right there at the gate area that will enter onto the land allotment before you get to the temple, where you have an east gate, a north gate, okay? But this is just to enter into the land area where that's considered the holy portion for the Lord. The city is what takes you there. Kind of interesting.
City is just for the house of Israel.
It's for the city, yeah. Yes. It's going to, all this land that we're talking about right now is Israel. That's why I keep saying, people who don't think that the tribulation is about Israel and about God fulfilling these promises, the Abrahamic, the Davidic, and the Levitical, they've just totally missed it, because everything that's being allotted is not for the Gentiles, it's for Israel. And they're going to be named by name in the next chapter. This tribe gets this tribe gets this tribe gets this. So there is a strong emphasis of the focus is on Israel. Why? Because they're God's chosen people. Why? What is the point? I mean, are they better than you and me? Did they do it any better than you and me? They didn't even do it better than Satan. Satan fell too, remember? Why? Why is God doing this specifically for Israel? What does Ezekiel tell us? You profane my name, what am I going to do? I'm going to vindicate my holy name. And then every time that you look at that in the scriptures here throughout Ezekiel, at one point he'll address Israel. I'm doing this before you, Israel, so that you will know that I'm Lord. Then other places I'm doing it before you, the nations, so that you will know that I am the Lord. He's doing it for the whole world, so that the whole world knows that he is the Lord. Why must he do this? Because he made these covenant promises. So by doing this for Israel, you don't have any reason to feel jealous or to feel slighted in the least bit. This is all about God's glory, because he said he would do it, and he's going to do it. And there is no man on earth that can stop that. That is proving God's power, his authority, his sovereignty, his love, his truthfulness, his righteousness, his holiness, and even his judgment is proven to be truthful and right by all the things that he's going to be doing in this millennial time. So exciting. Very cool. Okay?
Go back for just a minute, when you said, entering the east gate of the city, or?
Of the land allotment. I'm just saying, see where he puts it proportionally? It lines up with the dark green is the temple. The green all around is the land allotment that we just talked about here, an allotment of land to the Lord. It's the temple and all this green land around it. And he goes on later and he says about this green area, this is where the Levites will live, and it's where the priests will live. The priests live closest to the temple. The Levites live on this outer portion. But it's basically their cities, it's their homes, it's their subdivision. It's where they get to live. Because the Levites,
So all the saints will be living outside.
Right. Yes. And the rest of the nation is going to be lived. The next one is, in verse 7, what? Land for who? Yep. Land for the prince. And that land for the prince is where? On each side of it. So the land area for the city is basically east of the Holy Land portion. And this one is east. Oh, wait a second. That's not east. This is not east. I'm sorry. Let me fix this. It's south. South of the Holy Land portion. This land is east and west of the holy portion. And I am going to send this map to you. It's part of it's already on my chart. Remind me to send this one also, because it's not actually in my teaching chart this time. I have another one on my teaching chart for you, which I gave to you once before, but it helps you understand where the places are that they're doing these sacrifices. But I'll send this one out for you if you want to use it for points of reference, okay? All right, so there's that. Okay, so now we have a land for the prince. It's on either side of the holy allotment, west and east sides of the holy allotment, okay? East and west of the holy portion. Okay, one more, 8. It's what? Yeah, land. And I'm going to put on here for the whole house of Israel. It's all the rest of them. Okay. The rest of the land shall be for the tribes of Israel. That's in verse 8. Okay? Any points of interest or questions on those first 8 verses?
Okay, so number 8 is around this whole.
It's going to be, yes, and we're going to see when we get into our next chapter, it's going to start saying geographically where. But what we know is we have a land allotment. We have right here, we have the very center. We have this land right here. Pardon?
I don't see how 7 and 8 are not just I'm confused.
7 is the prince shall have land on either side.
It says, this shall be his land for possession in Israel, so my princes shall no longer oppress my people. Like, it doesn't separate out and say that it's separate or something.
Well, because what he's doing is distinguishing the city from the prince in verse 7.
I got that. I'm not concerned about the city
Yeah.
and the prince. I'm concerned that you broke out 7 and 8 and said that the land is for the prince and the land is for the house.
Because 8, he concludes it. He says, but all the rest shall be given. So all I did was mark
Oh, I see. Okay, but the
at the very end. And the rest of the land shall be, because otherwise there's no place for it.
because I didn't keep going again.
Yeah, I know. And this is why we do it together, you guys. It really helps sometimes and sometimes you guys catch things I miss too, and you have to correct me. So, it's all fair in love and war. Actually, this isn't a war. This is a lot of fun. But it is helpful to have everybody help you out here. I saw verse 8 separate because its conclusion is the rest of the land is for the rest of the tribes. Okay, that's an 8. Then we go to 9. And now he starts talking about basically righteousness statutes, okay? First it was all land allotments. Now it's going to be righteousness statutes of various kinds, right? And that's going to be 9 all the way to 25. And there's a variety of ways we break it down in our paragraphs, okay? So our first paragraph is going to be 9 to 12. And who is he addressing 9 to 12? The prince. He's talking to the prince. He's telling that prince what must he do?
Put away violence and destruction and practice justice.
Yes. And he says, stop your proportions for my people. Okay, I had to look that word up. I can't even pronounce it. That tells you how badly. To expel them, in other words, okay? I looked it up. Expropriations. There it is. It came to me. That's not a word we use often, unless you're in land management. Okay, the number is 1646. it's the act of expelling or expulsion. It means to dispossess. Now, in this case, dispossess them from what? From their land that is actually rightfully theirs, or removal of property. Now, there's a passage in Nehemiah chapter 5, 1-5, that you can go back and look at an example of how the king went in and took, was it Naaman's? What was the guy's name? I can't remember. Anyway, Naaman? Was that right? Nabal, maybe that's it. Anyway, whoever he is, the king went in and tried to take his land away from him, and he did. He took it from him, and that's what he's saying. You cannot do that any longer. He says you have to stop doing that to my people, declares the Lord God. And then he goes on to talk about the next subject, which is what? Because it's really different, isn't it? Yeah, just balances. A just ephah, a just bath. The ephah and the bath shall be the same quality, so that the bath will contain 1/10 of a homer, and the ephah will have 1/10 of an omer. They will be equal. They're standard, so he's standardizing things, right? Just purchasing standards are decreed. He's standardizing costs of things. I love this. Not just measurements, but he's standardizing the value of it, so that when you go to purchase something, you're getting fair treatment when you buy it. We don't always have that, do we? How many of us spend a lot of hours on the internet searching to find the best purchase price? Half the time they're made in the same place by the same company. They just get a different label slapped on them. And God says, no more of that. You're going to have just balances, and everyone is going to get treated equally. It's either worth this amount or it's not. And it is worth what it is worth, and everyone gets charged the same. You don't give special favors to your friends. You don't charge the poorer people a bigger exorbitant amount that they can't afford. It is standardized. I just think that's so cool. And he says, and the shekel shall be 20 gerahs, 20 shekels, 25 shekels, and then 15 shekels shall be your manna. I guess that's, and I didn't get to look those up. I meant to. I've got them marked. Oh, you did look them up? So what's that last one? I have a guess. M-A-N-E-E-T-H, manna. It shall be your manna. Is that your daily income?
Well, it says
Wages? Yeah.
60 shekels and 1/50 talent of silver.
The manna, that's the definition of it? M-A-N-E-H? It's not about a daily wage? Okay. All right. Well, I didn't get a chance to look at that. So if anybody did, that's awesome. I'm going to go back and look at that when I get home before I teach tonight, and I'll have it better. I marked it, but I forgot to look them up.
Can I go back to verse 9? Is
Okay.
he reprimanding them?
Yes, he is. Why would he be reprimanding them here at this point? Where are you in history? When was this vision given to Ezekiel?
Being told to the people.
He's telling the people of the days of Jeremiah, you have to stop doing what you've been doing. You can't have unjust balances. You cannot take their land away from them. That's another real biggie. And that was where I remember when we studied, we did the earlier Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those first 5 books of the law. And we were seeing in there how the people, even the king, even Solomon and David, were selling off pieces of land in order to different things. I'm going, why are you selling your land to a foreign king who's a Gentile? And God said, this land is yours, and you're selling it off. I was like annoyed. That's why. That's why it's in here, because you're not going to do that anymore. No more selling off the land I've given to you. So 9 to 12 is... I'm going to put it this way, that way. Justice and righteousness by the prince no stealing. I'm going to put stealing land from other people. They don't get to do that. And also fair and just balances. In other words, he's telling them these are purchasing is standardized. I think that's cool. Fair and just balances, standardized purchasing prices, so that everyone gets treated the same. So justice and righteousness statutes, well, justice and righteousness of who? By the prince and by the people who for buying and selling. And the reason I think he put it all, I guess you really could put justice and righteousness of prince as your title, because it wouldn't be the same then as your general segment division, because he is talking to the prince. It's the prince who's going to set these standardized purchasing prices. He's the one in charge, right? The people have to obey what the prince will set as a standard. But God is giving them that. This is what it will be. And so he names it out. Okay, 13 to 17 then is the next one. Now he's going to go on to another thing that has to do, again, with righteousness and righteousness statutes. But in this case, he's talking again to whom? He's talking to the prince or about the prince. And what is he saying? Did you comprehend what you were reading in there?
Basically, he's going to be the one that does the offerings.
Yes, it is. This is the offering that you shall offer. And then he tells the prince, this is what you are going to do. I'm telling you, prince, this is what you will do. And then he lists it and gives all the details on it. Then in 15, and it's going to be 1 sheep from each flock of 200 from the watering places of Israel. So where is this stuff coming from? From all the land of Israel, from all the people of Israel, for a grain offering, for a burnt offering, for peace offerings, to make atonement for them, the people. So you could put a Star of David on there. This is for Israel. All the people of the land shall give to this offering for the prince in Israel. Are you catching it? Basically, it's a tax. The people are going to be taxed by God through this statute, this righteous statute, where they give regularly into this tax. Now, I don't know if it'll be yearly, if it'll be monthly, quarterly. I don't know how that's going to be. It doesn't say. But they're going to give to the prince so that the prince, when it's time for their feasts and festivals, he will have resources to offer these abundance of offerings that are going to have to go in these feasts and festivals. There's a lot of animals that get slaughtered and a lot of cakes and breads that are made with peace offerings and fellowship offerings and so forth, right? So he's saying right here, this is prescribed atonement offerings for the prince to give on behalf of Israel. That's a long title, I know. But I needed to clarify it even for myself, because when I first read it, I'm going, okay, who is he talking to? He's really saying to both the people and to the prince. Both of you have a responsibility. People, you must give to the prince so that he has something to give on your behalf. Prince, when you come to give, you must give this much. You can't hold back what they have generously given to you. Right? Okay, we're getting there. We're okay, thank you. Okay, all right, so he says, here it's going to be atonement offerings prescribed to be given to the prince.
But they're feast offerings and atonement offerings, right?
Yes, offerings is general. Atonement offerings, it's all of them.
For the feast?
It's all of them give atonement to some degree. One of them is a sin offering to atone for that sin. One is a peace offering to appease God with a soothing aroma. Some of them are fellowship offerings, and again, they're still offered as an atonement. Because every single one of those feasts, what it does positionally for the person is make them right before God. They're a visual exercise that they do For them to relate to understanding, they need a mediator between them and God. They need forgiveness of sins. And they do these things that are prescribed. All of it is to atone for themselves before God, to put them in right position with God. If you don't like the word atonement, you can switch it. Just put offerings. Okay? If that word atonement bothers you, just offering.
Yeah, I've seen that. But I thought the atonement offerings were different.
No, they all atone in some way or another at the end. They put them positionally. They either give forgiveness of sins or they restore fellowship. Did you do your homework on day 5? Okay, on day 5, you got burnt offerings, you got grain offerings, you got sin offerings, you got guilt offerings, you got peace offerings. All of them, in the end, atone in some way or another and put that person positionally before God in an acceptable way, that they may be accepted by the Lord. Okay? So in that, you're right, there is a day of atonement, you're right, but again, even on the Day of Atonement, there's lots of different offerings. They're not all just the burnt offerings. There's cake offerings, there's wine, there's libation offerings, there's all kinds of things. All of them constitute the Day of Atonement.
I thought atonement meant more of a cleansing than an
They are, well, it's still an offering. You still have to do it free will. You don't even come into salvation without offering yourself up. As a matter of fact, you're to be offering yourself as a whole burnt offering, as it says in Romans 12, right? That you're to have this atonement. It's still atonement for you to be accepted before the Lord. Yeah. You listen, I understand you guys. These, and I still don't understand them fully. These different sacrificial offerings that they did in Israel are complicated to us because we are not familiar. That's all. If I said to you, here's the Lord's Supper, and I handed it to you, would you know what it is and what it does? It's that in remembrance of what Jesus did to atone for you so that you could be in the presence of God, right? That you would be accepted by God. That's what all these offerings do. Okay? All right, so atonement offerings prescribed to be given to the prince. Okay, and I'm just going to put up here in parentheses the word tax, because that's the best way for you and I to understand or comprehend it. It's a tax. The people must give to the prince a certain amount of these animals from the flock, so that when it comes time for him to go and do these feasts on behalf of the people to make atonement for them, he will have plenty of animals to go for that offering. It's going to be thousands of animals in some of these feasts, right? Because you're talking all of Israel is going to be required to come for the spring and the fall feasts in particular. And then I don't know how many of us get to go in and do some of this. I'm not sure. That part I'm still a little fuzzy on. But even if it's just Israel coming, it's going to take thousands of animals for all the people to have this atonement on behalf of them, their family, their clan, maybe it's just their tribe. I don't know how that's going to be broken down, but he has to give atonement for them. And so this atonement offering, it's a tax. It's prescribed to the people of Israel. So I'm going to put down there. Prescribed to Israel. There's my Star of David. Israel. And they have to give that offering to the prince so that he's equipped with things that he needs to give to that offering when it comes time. Okay? All right, I'm going to go over here. I kind of thought I might need more room over here. Now we're going to do 18 to 25. And this last one, so each of these have to do with righteousness statutes. The first one is, prince, this is what you do. You are to have no stealing of people's lands, and you're to set fair, just, and balances for the people. So in other words, standardized purchasing prices. The next thing, atonement offerings are prescribed to Israel. Israel, you must do this on behalf of your prince so that when it comes time, he can give offerings for you. And so, again, it's a righteousness statute that he institutes for them. It's a new law system. It's a new way Israel's going to be set up. Now we're at the last one. Now what we see are two specific time frames mentioned. The first one is the first month. The first month you shall take a young bull, and he goes through and he talks about it. And thus you shall do on the 7th day of the month for everyone who goes astray or is naive. You shall make atonement for the house. In the first month on the 14th day you shall have a Passover, a feast of 7 days. Now we know that this one is the Passover. So whatever's happening here in 18 and 19 is something new. It was not done before in Israel. It's added in, but it is on what month? The first month. So what God has now done is set a new calendar for us. Remember we talked about in the past that Israel has two calendars. One is secular and one is holy, right? Sometimes they call the first of the year a time that's not their first of the year holy time. Okay, so what God is now doing, he's saying no more separation between the holy and the profane. It's all going to be holy unto me. And I'm going to designate, by the way, Passover, which comes when? In the spring. Where is you and I's first of the year come? In January, in the dead of winter. He's saying no more. Your first of the year is going to be in the spring. And it's going to be, first of all, a time to cleanse things and prepare things for the coming next feast, which is just a few days later. I think, is it a week later? The first 14 days later, which is going to be on the 14th day of the month. It's going to be the Passover. So what they're going to do is they're going to cover Passover and unleavened bread. Now, I went through that, and it was a little bit complicated, but what you see then with that spring feast on the first of the month, it's a sacrifice and it's a celebration. It's been instituted. It's a new thing that's going to happen on that first day. But on the 14th day, it's the fall feast of tabernacle, it's the spring feast of, I had them written down. Hold on. Let me see so I don't get them going. Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. But did you notice what's not in there? Pentecost. It's not mentioned. We don't know why, but it's not in there because it comes 50 days later. It'd have to have another 50 days later, and it would have to be added in here. It's not there. This one on the 14th covers a week time frame. One whole week is what Passover covers. You can call the whole week Passover. We break it down into 3 feasts: Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. That's all the 1 week. So that's covered. What's added is whatever happens here at the first of the month, so that you just see that. What you can do is put yourself a little note. Where's Pentecost? Okay. What happens on Pentecost, by the way? What did they do on Pentecost? Yeah, we receive the Holy Spirit. But what does he do in the ceremony of the? He takes 2 loaves of bread and he waves them before the Lord. And what is it symbolic of? Jew and Gentile in one body by the Holy Spirit's coming, right? Very interesting, because I got to thinking about that, and I'm like, okay, so where's Pentecost? Well, if it's Jew and Gentile in one body, what's going to happen on the next one on the 7th month is what? What happens on the 7th month? It's their fall feast. It's your sin offering, and it's your Day of Atonement. This is when they come in for tabernacles. It's not the Day of Atonement, sorry. It's the tabernacle. It's when the people come in for the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days. That's how it's prescribed originally. If you go back and look at the original, you see it lasted for 7 days, and that's what he says here. For 7 days you do this. So that is the Feast of Tabernacles. What's missing from there? The trumpet, atonement. Now, I do not know why those two are omitted. I have no clue. It doesn't tell us. I have no guesses. But I did have a guess for Pentecost. If, in fact, this tabernacles, what is tabernacling? What does that mean? We all dwell with the Lord. If you've had in the fulfillment of your spring feast through Pentecost, Jew and Gentile now in one body. When it comes to the millennial kingdom, and we all are called up to worship the Lord on these feasts, the whole earth sends representatives of its nations, at least. It could be more than that, and maybe the believers get to. We don't know. We don't know how we are all going to fit into this. But my thought is, if Pentecost fulfills Jew and Gentile in one body, and here we get the 7th month Feast of Tabernacles, and it's Jew and Gentile in one body. In a way, Pentecost is represented in that last feast. It's just moved geographically from the spring, and it's joined together, which is what it does. It joins together the Gentile and the Jew into one body through tabernacle. So that's my guess about that. It just came as a thought. Now, I might be totally wrong, because it does not say that. But what it does say is, we have the first 3 feasts still being celebrated here, which is Passover, including the unleavened bread, and it goes for 7 days. That's standard. And we have a new thing, which is on the first of the month, 14 days earlier, they go through cleansing ceremony to prepare their tabernacle and everything for the tabernacling. Now, why would they do that? Why might they do that? I mean, because remember, we are proclaiming the gospel to unsaved people in that 1,000-year reign. We're already in faith, but we're talking about people there that are in their flesh, and they're going to need to come into salvation eventually. At the beginning, it's all believers, but in time, it becomes a lot of unbelievers. Why might there be a cleansing ceremony before you're allowed to come in and celebrate the feast of Passover, the feast of Passover and unleavened?
Confession of, saying Jesus is Lord.
Yeah. Do you remember the Feast of Trumpets? How they give you the trumpets, and it comes like 10 days, is it, before? I think before they do the other one. And I'm wondering if it's along the lines of that. Maybe it just kind of came to me. Maybe it's along the lines of that, where 10 days before, they're going to do something to prepare the people's hearts for this Feast of Passover, in the same way that trumpets prepared the people's heart to go in for those 3 feasts of the fall, which was trumpets, atonement, and then booths. I don't know. So I'm just throwing things out there, you guys. I'm really just, did any of you all consider any of this or think about all of this? Am I the only one doing that? I'm going, I don't get it. Okay, let me see. What might this be? How could this? But what we absolutely are seeing is He is reconstituting. But is he omitting or leaving out any of the feasts? Are the feasts still quite prevalent in the millennial kingdom? Yeah, we have spring feasts and fall feasts. He's just rearranging the calendar. He's added in one new piece of things. It sounds to me like possibly he's merged that Pentecost with the tabernacling, because that's what it does. In reality, that's what the 2 loaves do. It unites them. So possibly that's going on there. The other 2 feasts, I'm not sure, but they're probably alluded to in here somewhere. And I'll bet we'll get it explained when we get there, right? For right now, 18 to 25, then, it's a new yearly calendar. And it's going to be for the whole earth. Nobody gets to have their January 1 be their new year. It's all going to be at the beginning of the spring, 10 days before Passover. Okay, and he says, then he gives required annual sacrifices and festivals or feasts. Okay? So there's a new yearly calendar that's going to be given. The first month is spring feast, Passover. I forgot. Let me do this again. 1 is cleansing, and number 2 is Passover. So those are the 2 things given to them for the spring feast. Then there's the fall feast, and it lines up with tabernacle. Okay, or Feast of Booths. 15 days for 1 week. Starting on the 15th day for 1 week. Oh, what, 15 days for 1 week? That doesn't make sense. Okay, so omitting Pentecost, waving of 2 loaves, Jew and Gentile in one body. I went back to Ephesians 2, 11 to 14. It may be joined and celebrated in the fall Feast of Booths. That's just a guess. When all the people of the earth come to celebrate it together. If that's how it is meant to be viewed at that time, then that only leaves out trumpets and atonement, which I still haven't figured out. I'm still working on that in my head. If you guys come up with any brilliant ideas, let me know. In any case, there will be significant change to the feast celebrations, yet they are not forgotten nor neglected. The feasts represent the promises of God, which will have at that time been completely fulfilled, but they're still teaching them to these new people who are being born on the earth at that time. And the yearly calendar will now begin with Passover. Calendar without secular influence, all is going to be holy to the Lord, which I think is really cool. 13 minutes to get through, 46. Okay, theme, major theme there. If you all don't help me quickly get through it, I can't quickly get through it. You have to help me. What did you title 46? Well, 1 to 10 is talking about doing what? What are your key words in there? 1 through 10. Do you mark your key words? What are they? Say it again. The prince again, and concerning the prince, it's talking about the prince, but it's the prince in relationship to what? The priests who do what? Offering. What are they doing offerings for? Sabbaths and the new moon. And what do you do on the Sabbath? You rest and worship. Right. So 1 through 10 is about worship on the Sabbath and the new moons, and then he dictates to the prince what he's to do, and he dictates to the Levitical priests what they're to do on these days of Sabbaths and new moons. So your major subject there is about the Sabbath and the new moon. What are you going to do? So basically he's giving them ordinances for worship, correct? Are you seeing that? This is your ordinances for how you will worship to me on the new moons and on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day comes how often? Every week. How often does the new moon come? About once a month. Right. So, and how those are going to get worked out, I don't totally understand it. I know that for 6 days of the week, though, the gate is going to be closed during that time. It's only opened for the Sabbath worship time. And the prince is given certain rules and regulations that he's to follow. So they're ordinances, they're laws for worship, right? For the people's worship and for who else's worship? There's 2 people groups here, the people and who's their leader? The prince, right? Worship for the people and the prince. Okay. Boy, that was pulling teeth, you guys. You aren't helping me out at all. Okay, so I'm going to put, you can say laws if you prefer. Oh, my pen is not working very good. I'll go to purple. Ordinances for Israel. Their worship and their prince. Okay, so these are the ordinances. The first one, go back to my black so I get the, we're going to do 1 through 10. This is the weekly Sabbath and the new moons. Okay. not going to spend a lot of time delineating, but basically the east gate's going to be open. It's going to be shut the other 6 days. Sacrifices are going to be given. The prince offers offerings by the priest, and the people offerings by the prince. Did you catch the difference on that? Verse 2, the prince offers, his offering for the prince is done by the priests. The priests do it for him in verse 2. But in verse 4, the people's offerings are given by the prince. So I think that's kind of interesting. What does that mean? I don't know, but it's interesting. Then the next part is the order for entering and exiting. That was really, really cool. The prince enters by the east gate, and he exits the same way. So he goes in, he does a U-turn, and he goes out, correct? But the people, when they go in, what do they do when they leave? Do they turn around? No. No turning back, no turning back, right? That song, the cross before me, the world behind me. That's what it made me think of. I thought there's a spiritual truth in this of there's no turning back. You come before the Lord, you've presented your offerings, you've made a commitment to him, you've worshiped him now, you live that out. No turning back, right? It was cool. One of the pastors I listened to talked about how he thought about how people come forward to make a confession and to speak to their pastor or whatever, and maybe make a commitment before the altar. And what do? They turn around and go right back to their seat. And he said, no turning back. He says, I think I've got, he said about his own service, he says, I think I need to find a way to make the people, go in a straight line back around this way or something, just so that they know no turning back. So that's what we see in 1 to 10, the new weekly Sabbaths and the new moons. About the gate, so those were your subjects, the gate, the sacrifices, what's going to be done, who's going to do it, and the order. Okay, how to enter and how to exit. And I'm sure there's absolute spiritual messages in all of that. We will have to get more information from the Lord when we get there. 11 to 15. We're looking again at ordinances for worship or for their prince. This one, he said, it's about the prince, right? When the prince provides a free will offering, he's to do these things. And you shall provide a lamb a year old without blemish for a burnt offering to the Lord daily. So there's another designated offering in there, right? Also, at the appointed festivals in verse 11, you're going to offering there. So basically, overall, it's the festivals and the appointed feasts, a free will offering, and a daily offering to the Lord, which he says in the end of verse 14, it's a perpetual ordinance. In other words, you start burning and you never stop. So what we see in 11 to 15 are all these different designated free will offerings, designated offerings and free will offerings, okay? Ordinances or rules or laws for free will and designated offerings. So it's the ordinances for that, okay? Requirements at festivals and feasts, free will offering by the prince, and the daily offering, a perpetual ordinance. So that's where we went in then to day 5, and I kind of tucked it into here on my chart for you all to look at. Israel's sacrifices are a tutor. So I'm going to read through my list to expedite this. How does that become a tutor for them in that time in the millennial kingdom? It recognizes sin. It teaches them to confess it and to seek forgiveness for it. So that's what it's going to do. Why have those sacrifices? Same reason that they did them before. Same reason in a lot of ways we do it now. 1 John says that we are to confess our sins daily, regularly, and he will forgive us our sins. That's not talking about salvation. That's talking about the daily confessional. So here it's to recognize sins, confess it, and to seek forgiveness of it. To know God's requirements for forgiveness. What is the requirements that's demonstrated to them there? In those sacrifices, what's demonstrated? What kind of sacrifices are they? What do they give at the offerings? Animals. And what happens to the animal? It's killed or it's burned up, but it's killed first, which is the what? Shedding of blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin or remission of sin. Okay, so these sacrifices that they're going to be giving in these weekly and Sabbaths, the new moons, and then these designated and free will offerings, what I'm seeing here is to recognize their sin, confess it, and seek forgiveness. It's to know God's requirement for forgiveness, which is basically an unblemished lamb, and it's for bloodshed, right? You go back to Leviticus on that. It's also to draw them into fellowship with God, correct? To teach them to come in fellowship with the Lord. We see that in the fellowship and the peace offerings that are in that Levitical stuff that we looked at. Again, back to it's a tutor to teach them how to come to Christ. And also it becomes obsolete. In Hebrews 8:13 and 10 and Hebrews 10, what we went and looked at in Hebrews 10 in particular, what did Jesus do concerning these feasts for us in the new covenant? He made the law obsolete. But it's not going to be obsolete in the millennial. He's bringing it back for the purpose of what? For those who yet still need to come into faith. So obviously, we'll do it in remembrance of, but the world who's unsaved will be doing it to come into that relationship, just like they did in the old. Does that make sense? So it serves two purposes, one for remembrance and one to bring people into faith. So it teaches them. Okay, the last thing is 16, or it's not the last one, but 16 to 18 is our next paragraph. Now this is interesting. We're back to the land again, but in this case, it's an ordinance again, ordinance concerning the prince, and it's designating to him what he can and cannot give away for inheritance purposes, right? What was the distinctions there?
He can only give to his son from his own possession. He can't scatter anybody.
Right,
To do it.
right.
Son always keeps it.
And if he does choose to give as a gift to a servant some of his land, they don't get to keep it forever. It comes back, and it's said on what day? The year of liberty. Do you know what that year is? That's the year of Jubilee. Every 50 years, it's the year of Jubilee. So every 50 years, it'll come back. So he can give it as a gift. If I were serving the prince in Israel, he could give me as a gift a portion of his own land to use until the year of Jubilee. But at the year of Jubilee, me and my family got to skedaddle. We have to move out because he gets the land back. Okay? Land inheritance laws for the prince. Okay? And the prince shall not take land from any of the other people. So what he can do, what he can't do. That simplifies it right there. What he can do and what he can't do. Okay? 19 to 20. This one's strange, but this one's back to Israel. Right? Laws or ordinances for Israel concerning their worship. Specifically, what is this talking about in 19 to 20? Yep, holy chambers. Okay, so these are, and those holy chambers, what are they being designated for? The part that we're talking about here. What are they doing with it? Yeah, so it's basically their kitchen. Right, for doing the work for the giving of these offerings. So these are the designated kitchen for the priests, the holy chambers. So in the holy chambers, there's a designated kitchen for the priests, okay? So, there is, in this one it says, faced north. Behold, there was a place at the extreme rear toward the west. And he said to me, this is the place where the priest shall boil offering and the sin offering, where they shall bake grain offering. It's one place for them. But 21 to 24, how many? Now you get 4. Yeah. So now we're at 21 to 24, and now we're talking about who? Up here, in other words, we're talking about Zadok priests, right, particular. But also, even the Levites, if they go into the inner sanctuary, into the holy place where they're serving, in their ministering before those altars, they don't get to go into the Holy of Holies. But if they go back in there, remember, they have to put on certain garments. They can't go out among the other people. So if they're back in there in that holy place, they would join the Zadok priests with them in that meal, possibly, I'm guessing. But when it comes to ministering, and that's what we're talking about here, designated kitchen for the priests, the holy chambers, to offer sacrifice by boiling. So in other words, if they're boiling them, that means somebody's going to be eating them, right? These are feasts that they're going to enjoy. So 21 to 24 is the outer court.
What about that, on 19, in the extreme, there was a place at the extreme rear toward the west. What is that about?
Okay, which verse are you in? Okay, so that's in the holy chamber. Okay, so
That's the place. The extreme rear toward the west is the place where they're going to boil.
okay, I have it for you right here on my map. Okay, we're just in these 2 paragraphs. We have one that's the holy chamber area, one is the outer court area. That's the Levites. I didn't get to finish writing the title there, but that's the second one. That's for the Levites to do their work, correct? It's going to be in the outer court. It's where he says, he brought me out to the outer court, led me across the 4 corners of the court. That's what you're talking about here. Here's your 4 corners. You want to look at it? These 4 corners, here and here. Those are the places where the Levites will go, boil those boilings, and the people come. And then right here, all along these areas here, they call them refectory halls or rectory halls. I looked it up. It's a dining hall, especially in masonry, or I think it has to do with monasteries, or college, academic institutions, or boarding schools. The name derives from the Latin refris, to make or restore. And what they're basically saying, restore because you're eating food. It's restoring your strength. It means to place, a place one goes to be restored. So these little blue square blocks around here are where the people come. These are the 4 kitchens that this last paragraph, 21 to 24, is talking about. They go there to do that boiling by the Levites and serving and ministering to the people. The other one in verse 19 and 20 is on the inner court, and it's back in here on this west wall that you were just talking about, the far wall. That's where the Zadok priests go and do, that's their kitchen. And it's on the inside in the holy area, and nothing they touch or participate in can be taken out into the outer courts at all. They have to stay back in there for that. The others is for the people. So that way you serve the people. That's the Levites' job. The Zadok priests, they minister before the Lord, and then they themselves are also fed sometimes of those sacrifices, depending on what the sacrifice is for. Okay? I think we're going to make it. Okay, so the outer court one, this is the inner court, designated kitchen for the priest. This is the Zadok priest, the holy chambers, to offer sacrifices by boiling. The outer court is a designated kitchen and this is for the Levitical priests to minister to the people. Meaning Israel. It's 4 corners of the outer court. Okay. Did y'all catch that okay when you did your own homework? Were you following basically where I took you, or did I just totally throw you off? You're awfully quiet about it. Makes me wonder if did you do okay with it? Or were you, listen, it's complicated because we're not Jews. We've never done this system before. And not only that, but hey, think of how confused you are right now. Think of the Jew who knew the Old Testament system, and they're reading this from Ezekiel, and they're going, what? That's not what we do. That's not how it's done. That's not on the right day. That's not on that month. That's not, and what is this extra cleansing thing? What's that about? We don't even do that one. They were probably flipping their lids, and especially if they're very legalistic, and if they're, my personality, I like things very orderly and compartmentalized. I like a thing in its place and a place in its with its thing. I want things where they belong. I do not work outside the box. I follow the directions of a recipe or a pattern to the T. Even to my detriment sometimes when I know they're wrong, I'm like, but they said to do this, so I better do it and find out what happens, right? So you have a wallet on the floor, it looks like. Yeah. Okay, good. But the Jews are like that. They've been taught, do this exactly as you've been told. So they've been trained up from childhood. Follow the instructions exactly. So when Ezekiel brought this vision to the people and read this to them in the days that he was living in, this is basically in the days of Babylonian captivity. They've just left their temple and it's been destroyed. You think we're struggling with this? They were too. They were freaking out, I'm certain, because they're going, that is not right. You cannot do that. This is a perpetual ordinance from time immemorial. But what Jesus taught us about that was he said, no, I did not come to abolish the law, but to what? To fulfill it. And so when we move into the millennial kingdoms, we are still going to recognize those things, and we are still going to honor those things. All those feasts that God gave them, they're in there somewhere. But it doesn't clearly lay them out in the same way, and I think it's because now they're fulfilled. And so there's going to be a merging of some points, because the identifying mark for them, for instance, the Pentecost, that's Jew and Gentile in one body, tabernacling together. And because that gets fulfilled in the Old Testament, or through Jesus at his first coming, it's been fulfilled. Then in this new millennial kingdom that he's going to bring in, I think that tabernacling fulfills Pentecost also for them right before their eyes. And the world's going to literally see Jews and Gentiles worshiping together. Under the old system, the Jews would be like, you're not allowed in here, right? But in this new system, it's going to be presented slightly different because of some of these things. Well, actually, at this point, all of these feasts are going to have been fulfilled. So God is saying, I'm not forgetting them. They're not annihilated. They're not annulled. They're not gone forever. Qualities of them, just like the qualities of the temple itself and how the city is going to be laid out, and the gates on the door with the names of the 12 tribes, and the foundation stones of the kingdom in the new heaven and the new earth are going to have the names of the apostles. They're not going to be forgotten, right? All those symbolic things are going to go with us into eternity, because all of that laid down the foundation for who we are in Christ, our relationship with him. I think if you read these things from that perspective, you will find a rich, rich blessing in doing all these crazy detailed things that you're not totally grabbing hold of. Understand there's a symbolic picture in there for you, right? For me, that we remember what Jesus did for us, what God has done for us from time immemorial, how he had this all worked out from before the foundation of the world. He had this plan, and he did it for our benefit. And so don't blow it off, and we have a couple more chapters yet, so we've got 2 more weeks of homework to do. Finish strong. Go into this and just really dig out all the things that you can. And I hope what I did for you by just starting with this millennial stuff But then even talking about how does this affect us? How does this relate to you and I? You need to be asking yourself, we're at the close of this book. Right now, you're at the place of what we call analytical list making. You now need to step back, analyze everything you've looked at, and come up with subjects to say, okay, what is God teaching me here? And how am I going to make those applications in my daily life today? And try to do that for yourself. I can't do that for you. That is a personal, that is true worship time before the Lord. And I am always so excited when I get to that place, because the whole point to doing it inductively is that when you go before Him, you do it in truth. Rather than your own speculations, rather than in your own emotions about things, and rather than being clinical, God wants to draw you to that real worship place where you come before Him and say, wow, God, what you're doing for us, what you have done for us, what you have shown us in this book. This is all about Israel's history and their future, but it includes us in there. It just doesn't talk about us. But there is a place in there for us, and so that's why you have to go in and look at why these things and what is God going to accomplish during those times. Whew. All right, well, we did it 10 minutes over. Not too bad, considering. All right, thank you guys. I'll see you next week for Ezekiel 47 and 48.